I was a 10-year-old and lived in a small coastal town in Newfoundland that was littered with large forests. Almost every house had acres of forestry behind it, which in itself was very beautiful. As I am now 21 and live in a bustling city in Alberta, I do find myself missing this setting in my old backyard every once in a while, but it's usually accompanied by the unsettling memory that I'm about to recount. By the time I was in grade 4, I was already trusted to be home by myself as my mother went out to visit my grandmother and aunt, who literally lived a few minutes down the road from us. I was happy to have such a privilege. I was an only child, and my father worked in another province months at a time, so I was very lucky to have this opportunity. It usually meant late-night movies and video gaming, and on the odd night, exploring the forests. This night, I was exploring said woods. I usually never went too far in. Usually up to a large rock formation I liked to climb and look around through the trees in all directions. The house was always in sight, so I never felt scared or frightened about being there. It felt like my own private place that I could enjoy. As I was scaling the rocks to sit in my usual spot, I suddenly started hearing a sound from further in. A sound that wasn't natural at all. Crying. Faint crying. It sounded like a child, maybe an infant, crying relentlessly. I was more puzzled than scared, since crying was the last thing I would expect to hear in the forest. I must have listened for a good few minutes, convinced my ears were playing tricks on me, but it was in fact crying. In my mind, I imagined it was a young girl that somehow wandered too far into the forest and needed help. I considered going back to the house and calling my mother to help, but then I worried that the girl would wander further in beyond earshot. I decided to try to locate the sound myself. I made my way hastily through the trees and branches, trying to figure out the exact location the crying was in. It definitely wasn't as easy as I thought, and it was a matter of trial and error even to make sure I was going in the right direction. One thing I never realized as I was doing all of this was how consistent this crying was. No pauses, no words of any kind, just non-stop sobbing and wailing that had no end. What I did notice was the closer I got to the sound, the more metallic it sounded to me. I eventually reached a small clearing that had only a few small trees and bushes, and nothing else. I had never gone this far in before, so this was the first time I had seen it. When I made my way in, it didn't take me long to find out the source of the sound. A gray tape recorder, one of the biggest I had ever seen, was peeking out of one of the bushes, and the crying was coming out of the speakers. This really disturbed me, as I had went all this way expecting to find a real person, but it was only a tape recorder. As I was about to shut it off, I heard another sound coming from just outside the clearing on the opposite side. It sounded like steady footsteps, advancing in my direction. It only took seeing a tall, shadowy figure coming my way to send me running. Fortunately, by some miracle, I recognized my way back by identifying rocks and trees I identified as landmarks. Looking back, this probably saved my life. I never looked back, and I didn't try listening to see if the person was following me. I just kept telling myself to make it home, and nothing else. I had to get home. Once I saw the large rock formation, it didn't take me long to know the rest of the way without needing to survey my surroundings. I was out of the forest in record time, and immediately ran into my house, locking the door and shutting all of the lights off as I went to my bedroom. I didn't want this person to know where I lived, or I would really be done for. After shutting the curtains of my window, I peeked out through them as discreetly as I could to see if whoever was out there had actually managed to keep up with me. I didn't see anyone, but I stayed in that window for a good hour, waiting for someone to emerge out of the forest shadows. But nothing ever did. After that, I went straight to bed. I never did tell my mother about what happened on that night, and I also was never able to go back into that forest again. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell there was something a bit off about her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a, thanks? I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even printed out photos of him all over her mirror, and she owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying that I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she was obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run up to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for about 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her, and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and was turning the lock back and forth, over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it didn't help that she kinda looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause my movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure, and awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were actually going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening when I asked her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in a fit and yelled, "I'll slit your fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast, and went back to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in that house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it, to act like a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed, and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walking back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I went out into the hallway, and my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out just thinking about it. I'm a man in my late 20s. I work graveyard, midnight till 8 a.m., and have since I turned 18. At the time of this story, I lived with my wife and newborn daughter in a third-story apartment. Front door of the apartment and a small kitchen window are both accessible through the outside, but all the other windows in the patio door, which is attached to the living room, are about 40 feet off the ground. We live in a pretty safe neighborhood, but it's surrounded by some pretty sketchy areas. Also important to note is that the only air conditioner we have is a window mounted in our master bedroom, so all three of us were sleeping in that one room. My daughter was only a month old at the time. It's late July and blistering hot outside. I'm a cold weather kind of person, so anything over 75 degrees and I am freaking miserable. So I've just got the windows open, and the sliding glass door to the deck is wide open too, trying to get a breeze going through the house, since only the bedroom has an AC. To make matters worse, I've come down with this fever that is just kicking my ass, and I've just had a baby, so I'm running on about 10 hours of sleep for the whole of last month. As I said, I normally work graveyard, but this particular night, as I went out into the living room to get dressed for work, I could barely lift my arms. You know how when you've had a fever and your muscles turn to jello and everything hurts? That's me to the max. So I said fuck it, and called into work and passed out hard on my couch in the living room. I proceed to have hardcore fever nightmares and eventually wake in a pool of my own sweat. Checking the clock, I've only been out for 30 minutes. I start trying to go back to sleep when I hear this. I could not for the life of me figure out where this was coming from. It's not loud, but it seems like it's right on top of me. I listen as closely as my disease-addled brain will allow me, and nothing. The noise is gone as quickly as it began. I take a peek on the video monitor to make sure my daughter's doing okay, and promptly go back to sleep. As I'm once again awake and trying to figure out what that noise is, my attention is drawn to my infant daughter, crying in the other room. I know this means she's hungry, so I peel my ass off the couch and go to the kitchen to begin making her a bottle. My wife emerges from the bedroom, unaware that I'm home, and gasps with surprise, which startled me as well. I turn towards her to put her at ease, which causes the living room and the patio to be in my line of vision, though not hers as she is still in the hallway. As I'm telling her it's okay, it's just me, I see something fall off the roof and onto the patio, and then a moment later a man dressed from head to toe in black drops from the roof of our 3-story building and onto my patio. My feverish, sleep-deprived brain went full panic mode. I tried to think of words to blurt out, but all that came out was a loud panic scream as I took off running from the kitchen towards the patio door, which is wide open. The only thing keeping this guy out of my house is a flimsy-ass screen, which isn't even locked, and I'm moving like I've got cement blocks for feet thanks to my fever. Luckily, he heard my incomprehensible yelp and saw me running towards him in the darkness, and decided to scurry back up onto the roof like a fucking ninja. I pull the door closed and lock it. My wife runs off to call 911. While waiting for the police to arrive, I see that he has left his duffel bag on my deck. When the police showed up and investigated the bag, I was very upset by what they found inside. Zip ties, duct tape, condoms, disposable cameras, rope, a rather sizable dildo, a couple box cutters, and a nice big hunting knife. I have no doubt what this man came to do that night, and if I had decided not to stay home, I don't see what would have stopped him. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Big hit on the share it with your friends, because that really helps us get more stories in, and I really appreciate it. I hope you're all ready for the new year, if you haven't already passed that. And if you have, Happy New Year. And for those of you about to pass it or have already watched this video after it's already hit, Happy New Year! I really appreciate all the support I've been getting throughout the entire year. And even before that, but who cares about that because we're only talking about 2016, right people? That's right. The channels really wouldn't be where they are without all your guys' help and feedback, as well as obviously everyone watching it, leaving their likes and sharing. I want to give a huge thank you to all of you, and wish everyone a happy 2017. Now with that being said, we didn't have all of our Munios claimed, so I actually had to redraw for 5 more. So if you hear your name right here, or see it on the screen, congratulations, you've won one of the last Munios being given out. You have 2 weeks to private message me on YouTube with your name and address and a message under that if you want to say anything. So I'm going to go ahead and read these names, go ahead and look at the screen in case I butcher them because I do that crap all the time. Lord Scott Gaming, Stackin4127, Geek Mom D, Tiffany Wallace, Rose Petals. So if you're one of those 5 people, make sure that you private message me with your name and address within the next 2 weeks. Once again, I really appreciate everyone watching, and here's to a happy 2017. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.